Hola, we're here to make another quick video for Doodle Notes, and today we're going to work on the physical features of the United States. But as a practice, and I always like to do this when we start doing this stuff, I want you to rehearse your memory of what the United States looked like. We're going to practice this outline, so we're going to start with a plain piece of paper. I've always got my trusty Sharpie, so we're going to use the Sharpie, and we're going to see if you can pull this off here. Now, once again, it's not going to be perfect. I'm going to draw this border with Canada. When I come up here, I'm going to start drawing this little area around the Great Lakes area. There's 5 Great Lakes. We're not going to get into those today, but understand they're there, right in this area up here. And we're going to come up here right around this area where modern day Maine is. Working our way down the East Coast, Carolinas. We're going to come down to Florida, that peninsula. Peninsula is surrounded by 3 sides of water. Come over here where we know Louisiana is, a little boot. I come down here and draw the little chunk of Texas. We're going to roll up here, border of Mexico. We're going to come up, we're going to finish strong where California, Oregon, and Washington State are. Is this your map? Does it look perfect? No, it doesn't look perfect, but that is going to give you a real general practice on rehearsing some of this mind memory we have of what our country, what the United States looks like. And of course, you know this up here is going to be Canada. This down here is going to be Mexico. And we're flanked by different chunks of water. Now, this is what we're going to do, because some of you may already have access to this. This is the copy that we're going to practice on. But you know, it's really not that different from what I drew. It's not perfect, but it's not that different. But we're going to go ahead and we're going to start with this. Now, the reason why we're talking about this plays in really, really well with the previous video. We talked about what the obstacles towards westward expansion that we had in the 1800s. But you really can't appreciate that unless you really have a good idea of what those obstacles might look like. And I guess we probably should label our map before we do anything else. Let's do this. We're going to label this United States. Right at the top of your paper. And I'm going to label it terrain / physical features map. Now, the reason I'm using terrain / physical features is I just want you to make the connection between those two terms. They're very, very similar. Right here, I'll put the word map right in the center. Okay. And we need to orientate this map. Remember, this area up here is Canada. This area down here is Mexico. But let's also make sure we have our old compass rose. Because whenever you draw a map, a physical map or a terrain map, actually any kind of map, it's just good to have something on here that reminds you what directions you're working with, north, east, west, and south. And just for orientation's sake, remember this eastern coast, this is our original 13 colonies. And this entire map is filled with the 48 contiguous states. Contiguous means they're all connected. We also have states up here, clear up here in Alaska. We have them clear down here in the Pacific, which is Hawaii. We have a territory down here called Puerto Rico. But these are the contiguous United States, and these are what we're going to focus on, is the terrain that we deal with here. Now let's also orientate ourselves with some water. Most of you know where the Atlantic Ocean is. You also know where the Pacific Ocean is. But do you know what this is? I certainly hope so. This is the Gulf of Mexico. And you know, I want to go ahead and list the Great Lakes right through here. because I think it's important, when we go back and look at the War of 1812, which is something you may or may not get a chance to talk about in class. There were some major naval battles in this area. Now they're just great vacation spots, but even the United States Navy boot camp is up here near the Great Lakes. So we're going to label this Great Lakes. Okay. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a blue color, and you can use any shade of blue. I'm going to use this particular blue for my blues today, my water. And whenever we do a terrain map or a physical feature map, usually water is always demonstrated with the color blue. So over here, I'm going to add a little blue to remind myself that this is an ocean. And I'm not going to go all the way down, because if I go too far down, I'm going to run into Mexico, because Mexico comes right through here on down. But I am going to add some blue over here. Did you hear that noise? That was my dog barking. He was out there telling the man how it is. Sometimes he's got to do that. He gets a little stressed out when he hears things he don't like. And you just got to make sure people know it. Okay, I'm going to add a little blue here because I've got some lakes here. I'm not going to too crazy with the lakes, but we'll just do some of that right there. Okay, perfect. You guys are right on the money. Now let's talk about some of these terrain features. And we're not going to talk about all of them, but we're going to talk about some of them. And one of the very first things that colonists ran into as they started moving westward is a giant mountain range. And we're just going to draw mountains that look kind of like this, these little pointy things. This is not perfect by any means, but a lot of people don't realize there's a lot of mountains over on the East Coast. And these mountains are referred to as the Appalachian Mountains. Now I'm going to take the Appalachian. I got actually a smaller Sharpie I want to use for this. A-P, I hope I spell this right, P-A-L-A-C-H-I-A-N, Appalachian. And I'm going to put mountains, M-T-S, because that's my abbreviation for mountains. As I'm talking about these Appalachian Mountains, I'm going to add a little bit of brown here, just because I want it to stand out on my page a little bit. You don't have to do this, but it helps. Makes your map look more three-dimensional, I guess. And then, as they're moving this direction over states that we probably know to be, like Ohio and Indiana and places like that, they start moving this way. They're going to run into some new features here that we probably haven't dealt with early on in American history. But if you live in the Midwest, you know what these things are. You live in an area called the Great Plains area. And, I don't know the best way to describe or draw a picture of the Great Plains, but I'm going to draw some major grass. And the reason is because specifically in Iowa, when you come through Iowa, it is the most ecologically, environmentally different state than what it was when settlers first came here. We had tall prairie grass that was 4 feet tall that people came through here. And initially, they thought the ground was horrible to farm it. Now, you go through Iowa now, it's covered in farms. But initially, the ground was so dense with this grass and the roots were so thick that the blades that they were using on the plows weren't strong to cut through those grass roots. It wasn't until the steel plow was invented, and all of a sudden people realized, okay, now we got a tool. This ground is really, really good, and it became the farming hub that it is today. Um, $50 to anybody who can name who invented that steel plow. By the way, I'm not actually going to give you $50. I'm just throwing it out there. John Deere. John Deere is the guy who did that. You see John Deere lawnmowers all. In fact, John Deere even have their own color. It's called John Deere Green. It's incredible. Okay. Let's talk about the rivers. Because there are some huge monster rivers. If you go to the east, you go to the west, in the Great Plains, you can either run into one river called the Mississippi River, which is right off here from the Louisiana Butte. And it's going to come all the way up, kind of like that. And I can't imagine trying to actually cross that monster back in the day before they had bridges across. It would have been incredible. But right about this place right here, this is a city called St. Louis. And it's kind of significant because St. Louis was not actually settled by people who were Native American or necessarily by English settlers. I mean, this is one of those contributing things that were left over by the French influence in this area. Just like to say Des Moines, that Des Moines is French for two rivers. At least that's what I always told me it meant. Maybe my French is way off. Okay, and we got another river here, and this is a huge river. And if you take any time to read American history books about early 1800s, you might have heard of a guy named Lewis and a guy named Clark. These two people were contracted by Thomas Jefferson, the President of the United States, to explore this whole territory that'd be called the Louisiana Purchase and try to find a way to get over here. They wanted to see if the river would actually allow them to navigate the Pacific Ocean. It doesn't. It ends right around here. But this river is still monstrous. And actually, if the Missouri River actually started here instead of here, I believe, don't quote me on this, I believe it would be considered the longest river in the world. But it starts in St. Louis and works its way that direction. Okay, so we got the Great Plains, we got Appalachians, we got the Mississippi, we got the Missouri River. We also have mountains over here. These are called the Rocky Mountains. If you've been to Colorado, you've been to Wyoming, you may have been to one of these places. Rocky Mountains are huge. They're beautiful. They're gorgeous. If you've ever heard of John Denver, he sang all about them. Rocky Mountain High. I say Rocky Mountain High. I think he was talking about the elevation, not about the things you can do in Colorado these days that are legal. Okay, I'm going to add a little brown here. And the reason this is important is when you start visualizing or thinking about these settlers trying to make their way from this place all the way over to here, think of all the things they had to cross, and they were doing on horseback, on foot, in wagons, for goodness sakes. There was no cars, no airplanes, no helicopters. Very, very limited options to travel. And I'm going to add over here another mountain range. This is called the Sierra Nevada Mountains. And once again, I'm going to add a little brown, because that's what mountains look like to me. And we talk about mountains, but sometimes in between mountains, you either have valleys or you have low spots. You have, in our situation, these areas between the mountains, the Sierra Nevada and the Rocky Mountains, we're talking about the Great Lake Basin, Great Salt Lake Basin. We're talking about areas down here like the Mojave Desert, the Sonoran Desert, the Chihuahuan Desert over here in Texas, all these areas over here. And I'm going to draw some lines here. These desert areas have a whole different kind of ecosystem than what you would find over in the Great Plains or along the East Coast or near the Great Lakes or even in the mountains, because desert life is very difficult to live in. And it's interesting when we talk about these deserts, and I'm just going to label these deserts with a big D, because I don't necessarily expect you to memorize all these deserts. But I want you to take special interest over here in the Great Lakes, the Great Salt Lake Plains Desert, or this basin. One of the groups that traveled and migrated across this nation is the Mormons. And it's a whole different video. We can talk about them. But as they're settling over here and they made their way to this area, part of the reason why they chose this area is because they figured nobody else would want it. It was such a miserable, tough place to live in. They thought, boy, if we settle here, people aren't going to be trying to push us out of the area because they just don't want to be here. And you go to places today like Utah, which are beautiful places. But, imagine trying to sell these things in the 1800s. It would have been a tough effort to drive home if you were selling somebody an idea that this is a great place to live. Now, just to help myself a little bit, because I drew these rivers, I'm going to add a little color to them too. Okay. Now, there are lots of other things we can talk about for terrain and physical feature. You've got the Everglades over here. You've got open areas out here. There's more plains. There's tons of things we can talk about, but we're not gonna, because really, I just kind of wanted to show a contrast between some of the different regions. And as you're talking about expansion with travel, westward expansion, manifest destiny, think about all the changes people saw as they traveled from one coast to the next. It must have been amazing to these people, but it also must have been terrifying to some extent, because this is a really, really tough place to navigate, especially if you don't have the resources to do it safely. That's it. It's our United States terrain physical feature map: north, east, south, west, Atlantic, Pacific, Gulf of Mexico, Great Lakes, and everything in between. Good job. Thank you very much, and have a wonderful night.